Okay, wonderful. So once again, and we've got many people that have joined already. Wonderful to have you here for this session, UiPath Coded Agents, a new automation era. We'll bring this closer to you and introduce you to this topic. Maybe you've experimented with it before. What are we going to cover? This was in the event page, in the details, our agenda. So we want to dive into low code and Python, really what this comprises, how you can get started. So we want to give you sort of a Kickstarter set on how you can dive into this and also experiment with this UiPath Python SDK software development kit. So a deep dive there. I'll introduce the speakers in a second because we've also got someone from UiPath here with us to give a glimpse on sort of the roadmap and use cases for coded agents, what they are working on and why they are working on this topic. So greatly looking forward to it. As mentioned before we started the recording, feel free to post your questions in the chat as well. You can also connect with others. I'm posting our LinkedIn profiles here right now. So who are we? We've got Christian here from Germany. He's an RPA consultant, and I'll let the gentlemen also introduce themselves real quick when they get to their session and section. And we have from UiPath, working at UiPath, Eusebiu Chekan, principal product manager and product builder, he mentioned. So he's really building the coded agents. So that's wonderful. I'm Roman from Zurich, Switzerland. An automation consultant, and not just what is automation now with towards, of course, coded agents, even agentic automation and so on. It's an interesting time to be in this field, and I look forward to this. Now, what we'd like to do also is getting to know you, and as people are joining, we've got this Mentimeter, a survey. 3 questions are on there, just to get a feeling sort of where you're standing, what role you think you are mostly. So we see whether it's a fairly technical audience. I would assume we've got quite a mix here. But this is a QR code that you can scan, or you can go directly to menti.com and use this 8-digit code to join. And you will also see it when I change my screen. Some answers are coming in already. Wonderful. And here, we got quite the mix. Data scientists, or they take longer to check in maybe. But yeah, very interesting. So the ones, the number, you see it at the very top, menti.com, and then you see the number, and I can also post a link again in the chat here. Wonderful. So I don't know, Christian, Eusebiu, whether you expected that we get quite a population, and now the developers and software engineers are becoming stronger and stronger, more represented. Wonderful. So I think that's great also for the deep dive that is planned. Wonderful. I think we move on to the next slide. Thanks for this feedback here. Now, actually, you are able to. Sorry, that's my bad. So we already see some responses. You've been able to answer some here already about your experience. So, okay, quite an experienced group. Absolutely. So definitely great that we don't need to just scratch the surface, but we can dive in. So, and I know Christian and Eusebiu, they have some good content prepared for you here. Awesome. And then last, experience with agents, so mostly experiments with low code, no code. Amazing. I see in the chat, Ranjita is a fresher, no worries. This will bring you up to speed. And as we see here as well, some have no experience, but yeah, bear with us, and hopefully we can provide some good content so you can get started, or you see some potential and horizon where you can work towards. Awesome. I think this is quite good. Thanks so much for joining the survey. It gives us quite a feeling. Now, I would hand it over because we are starting with our first section. And Eusebio from UiPath, you've got sort of a short introduction from your side, yeah?
Yeah, perfect. Just to set the scene. And by the way, those were super promising results for the survey. And for those developing production agents or multi-agent, something that it's more complex, then I will deeply encourage you to maybe reach out directly to me. On LinkedIn, I would really like to learn what are the use cases, how you've implemented. But yeah, for everyone, but especially for those who mentioned that they already have production agents, yeah, I would like to get in touch. So please feel free to do so. So before we begin, I just wanted to set the scene on where these new UiPath coded agents fit in into the bigger picture. Whatever we do with a purpose, and I want to draw to give you the picture of that purpose, and then we will jump into some details. And in the last section, instead of a formal roadmap with items and some timelines, I will do something different, and I think you will appreciate that. I will give you a more advanced example with the latest and greatest things that we've developed as a platform with UiPath. Things that would actually, and going back to the first point, help go to production, which is ultimately what we want, to not only develop these agents, but to trust them with our critical missions, with our critical data, and with decisions, and for them to work and do the job autonomously. So without further ado, let me just share, and because the audience is rather technical, which I do appreciate, then I will be super brief on slides. So with that, coded agents fit in the picture because maybe you've noticed messages that you've seen on the media. Not a long time ago, the posts were brimming with optimism. Agents will do this, and everything was written with an urgency. It will happen tomorrow. And nowadays, the tone seems to be more sobering, right? Not we hear things like only 10% of the agentic automations deliver on the promise. Only 5% of them provide value. So the question is there something to it? Is that true? I would say yes, there is something to it. And this brings us to the decisive question on how can one can cut through the noise and go, beyond the hype to join the few, the 5%, the 1% who deploy agents with undisputed value in production. So trusting them with critical decisions over real data. And this is where UiPath coded agents fit in into the bigger picture, like a very important puzzle piece to complete the UiPath agentic picture, as they are really supercharged with a level of control and flexibility that makes a difference in delivering on this agentic promise that is highly anticipated and highly expected one. But before we go, just to understand when we are referring to code agents, maybe this is not the best term or might indicate there's only one agent. Whenever we say coded agent, we actually refer to a workflow, something that will have multiple steps, and you would transition from one step to another, from one state to another, and you'll have shared a state between one step and between nodes. And typically, whenever we are referring to code agents, basically we are thinking about coded workflows. So in simple terms, they are agents or workflows that are authored in code and natively integrated as an agent process within the UiPath platform. And more specifically, they are developed using a framework like LangChain or Llama Index. Sorry. Fail on PowerPoint part. Hopefully now it's okay. Yeah, I think I was here. Okay, so to be more specific, they are developed using a framework like LangChain or Llama Index. They are integrated with UiPath Python SDK to access resources from UiPath, like access buckets, context grounded, LLM gateway, human in the loop, and tasks, so on. Packed and published as a native UiPath package via command line. So it transforms a generic agent code into a native UiPath package. And finally, it is deployed as a UiPath process, and it's orchestrated, governed, and secured under UiPath. So just to understand where they fit into the bigger picture is that coded agents or coded workflows fully deliver on the UiPath mandate, which is to be the platform of choice for agentic automation. So the value proposition directly matches the UiPath vision. Actually, so to be open, flexible, and securely governed. We do offer a feature parity across approaches. So you know that we have the low-code and the coded approach, and we do offer feature parity, including traces, trust layer, eval, scoring, MCP, and beyond. Maybe the best way to put this is that after you deploy an agent, there is no difference between low-code and code agent. And lastly, one thing that might not be quite clear, and it's part of the roadmap and still in the works to some extent, is that we do provide the coherent authoring experience. You might think that there is a very clear line, very clear decision between low-code and code approach, and it might be from a skill set and maintenance perspective. However, from a UiPath perspective, one can start in low code and then convert to coded and continue to build from their point on. And whatever they build for agents, be it eval, they can use for low code and coded as well. So we do provide these coherent, not the same experience, obviously, because one is the authoring is by design different, but will be a coherent experience. Okay. So with that, I think that would set the scene, and I will hand it to Christian for the next section.
Sure. Thanks for the introduction. You said some very interesting keywords. I would like to come back to them during the next 35 minutes or so. My name is Christian Prior-Mamoulian. IT is not only my job, but also one of my hobbies. And last year was certainly crazy with pair programming capabilities that I could leverage. I only did IT hobby in the last year. I'm one of the guys who, as a child, I took the radio apart and looked inside the radio, what is inside. According to my memory, I fixed it. According to family members, maybe not so much. And I'm going to apply this approach a little bit here to the coded agents. And I want to show you. And I love talking to developers because the software engineer, that's the role of the many roles that I have, that is the most dearest to my heart. I want to show you how I approach these coded agents, mostly triggered by the forum challenge, admittedly, and hopefully then also guiding you into this way. And the second part is then also enable you to make good technical feasibility judgments before any project starts. We are typically approached which kind of platform, which type of right sizing of resources, etc., is the correct one. And hopefully going through this, you will not only learn how you yourself can aspire to develop coded agents, but also how they fit in the bigger picture. So we are right here between Python and UiPath. It's a location that I'm really, really excited about. So the following section will be mostly about how to prepare you to read the UiPath documentation. The SDKs, there are multiple of those, and the UiPath SDK, UiPath Python SDKs, mostly the orchestrator SDK, are very well documented, not only for the human, but also for the consumption by LLMs. But there are some things where I assume, as the typical traditional RPA developer, they need some context, and I want to provide you with them. So we are going to through some kind of a Python introduction, not in the traditional sense, rather in the delta, what you as a RPA developer can read and learn in all the other Python resources out there, but how to apply this then to the UiPath platform. Here are a few keywords that we are going to look at in the next slides. So yeah, about not even 10 I would like to look into. So Python development, how to explain to you how to develop Python. The following slides shall also give you an idea how I approach my Python development setup, and also give you an idea which technology in the Python development space might be outdated. And therefore, if you find tutorials, you need to judge, is it worth investing my time in this tutorial, in this video? And my recommendation is all the tutorials that are going to talk about project management of Python projects with UV. These are the ones that you should follow, which kind of excludes project descriptions with Anaconda or pip-based. My recommendation is when you hunt for trustworthy sources, look for the UV installation. It's interesting to know for us traditional RPA developers, the UV package, that is really the only software that you would install on your, for example, your Windows development PC. The rest that I'm going to show all then happens within the folder of where your project lives, most likely a Git repo that you have cloned from somewhere. So you install a small, very small piece of software, UV, and this will then enable you when you are stepping with a terminal. You also heard CLI, command line interface, was a term that the CPU used. You change into a directory, and you are going to UV init with the respective Python version in your project. So really, from then on, everything lives in that folder. That's something slightly different than we are used from the UiPath Studio development workflow. The dependencies, like we know in the UiPath Studio with the managed dependencies, are also added then on the command line UV add. Here in this case, I decided to add the dependency typer. Doesn't really matter which one. Most likely also LLMs will tell you which dependencies you would need for your respective use case anyways. But again, all this then is changing something in your folder. It's not going to affect your Windows system installation. UV also installs into your user profile, so you can start even in a restricted environment with Python development, as long as it can reach the internet and install the dependencies. If you UV init, some files are going to be created, and most prominently the project.toml. That's a text-based format that you see here. And it's a little bit like the project JSON that we know from the Studio projects, where, for example, the dependencies are listed. And the project version, project name, and similar things. So very, very close to what we see in the project JSON of the UiPath Studio development. I would like to point out one strength of Python amongst many. And I certainly also use Python sometimes to write myself some command line scripts. There's typically my first way is to write a short PowerShell script or something, but when it gets bigger, gets something more complex, then I tend to put this into a command line script with a Python interface. And yeah, so you can not only develop web applications or automate APIs with Python, but you can also develop some command line interfaces. Continuing further on, here's such a minimal example, Python code. It's typed code. It's not a visual development environment. It's most likely at university, you might have done some Python, some Java work or similar. So it's written in a text editor, and here with some syntax highlighting. And again here, this command line interface, just some sort of the documentation. That's the kind of documentation typically living in the GitHub repo as well, that's available So quite a typical type of documentation web page. I don't want to go detailed into the Python syntax, but let's just remind ourselves Python files are executed at runtime. It's not a compiled language, but it is a dynamically typed language where data types are resolved at runtime. So there's a Python interpreter. We saw the UV init. This even copies the Python interpreter in this folder. So you really have everything that you need in that folder, and it's not living somewhere else. And we will see how this is important when it comes to the coded agent later. So it's executed top to bottom, and there's some convention in those modules that you want to execute. The way to speak is dunder double underscore dunder name or dunder main. Then you would execute this. The Python interpreter knows if it was like here told to execute a file named main, and dunder name, dunder main, dunder init. That's the way how it is spelled. You inevitably are going to see this even in the Python SDK documentation. So you run it directly also with a Python interpreter in that folder. The dependencies that we added, again with UV, you have the way to sync it. You can add dependencies. You can always recreate it. All the dependencies are then installed with a output somewhere roughly like this, maybe with or without the warning, but you get the dependencies pulled in from pypy.org, which is the equivalent of the NuGet feed that we typically use in the UiPath Studio projects. So again, some central package repository that exists where for example, this type of package was pulled in. And creating virtual environment. So you really have a subfolder here, .venv is the typical folder name that is used, and everything lives in there. And with everything, I really mean, imagine as a RPA developer, it would be not only the .NuGet folder with your dependencies, it would also be the equivalent of the robot exe that we typically have on our unattended machines, and also the source code all in one folder. The Python interpreter is only 50 or 60 megabytes big, so it doesn't really add up. You can have hundreds of projects right between each other. But yeah, it's everything stored in the folder. Why is that important? It makes it easily reproducible on other machines. And then you can just write some basic code. That's even the basic code that UV would generate in the main.py file and take it from there. I should add some things that are also different from traditional low-code development with UiPath Studio. You can, for example, have dependencies differing for production or for other groups, like a development group. And in this case, when you later package them and execute them on the production environment, they would not be part then of the automatic provisioning. So something like in the UiPath Studio, if I'm packing workflow analyzer rules in a custom library, I sometimes wish I could exclude them from production package dependencies because a workflow analyzer library does not make much sense in production. Minor detail, but that's what the development dependencies are for. Not only code you would write, but also tests, or have the LLM help you writing the tests. And this is a typical way how the test cases then look like, the equivalent of the test manager that we have in UiPath Studio. And you can write unit tests, model tests, whatever. Something that is only not one-to-one applicable to the low-code drag and drop development is that the code formatter and weakness detector linter is in the current 2025 modern Python development setups typically done with rough. Again, you add the dependencies. It sets some pre-configured rules, and then you not only can check for minor issues, but also have them automatically fixed. It's a little bit like in the workflow analyzer, the style rules that exist there with the variable naming and similar. So formatter and linter, especially if you are working with an LLM, which was most likely be the case in these years, then you can also see that the code quality is up to par and like this. So now, why did I choose to show you this? Remember, I was a little bit focusing on the CLI, that you can implement command line interfaces, because the Python UiPath SDK also brings such a CLI with us. In this project, I have hypothetically already initialized it with Python version 3.11, added maybe some other dependencies like UiPath. And again, to really show you how this works, you add a dependency, and in the directory .venv.bin, you really have a UiPath executable. That's why you can then UV run UiPath version, or as the documentation on the UiPath SDKs show you, you can activate the whole virtual environment, and then you do not even need to use the UV run. I use it out of personal preference, let's say. But again, everything you do is somehow scoped to this folder. Of course, this one would be put in your git ignore. UV already does it by default for you, so you do not push all the unnecessary stuff to your Git repo. It's not part also of the package process later. I briefly mentioned Python is dynamically typed, not a compiled language. Let's not go down this rabbit hole, which sometimes ends up in even flame wars. But let me remind you of one or two things about how Python works with data types, or handles structured data. And it's a standard module that you do not need as a dependency data class that Python uses. And what we see here is the minimal example, which might look very familiar to you in a moment. Echo in and echo out, these are by convention in the UiPath SDK your equivalent of the input-output arguments. Guiding you on this bridge from the robotic development into the Python development, what our surface, our API, how our coded agent is addressed from the outside, namely from the orchestrator, is as important as we do this in UiPath Studio project. And input and output arguments, so to say, this is the equivalent. And you see, if there is not a default value given, then it's a requirement to supply this, and in the orchestrator it will also have the red asterisks. So this is the minimal example that would then output something not only locally, but also when you put it to the orchestrator and package it. Something that we do not really use in the traditional RPA development is the environment variables. If you've maybe done some web development, maybe influenced in the 12-factor app style of DevOps development, then you might have been familiar with environment variables on our Windows systems. We sometimes too little leverage the power of environments. These are operating system environments, and they are conventionally used not only in Python in so-called .env files, and then read by the code to set some secrets. So they have, of course, the orchestrator, which will then provide us the credentials when we execute the coded agent in the orchestrator. But locally on your development machine, in many cases, you are encountering this so-called .env files. You see here in the screenshots, of course, it's git ignored. You're not going to push your secrets to the remote repo, but it's customary to have an env.example file where you kind of document, so to say, and easy to copy paste the file with a new name to put them into usable format. So in your README, you would maybe specify what kind of variables to fill there. And with this little introduction into Python development very selectively, I believe, and I really went through the Getting Started guide of the UiPath Python SDK and also the other Getting Started guides, you should have an idea what all the commands you're doing. So I mentioned briefly in that you can also directly activate the whole virtual environment. So you must not fully prefix all the commands with UV-run, like I personally prefer to use. But UiPath -version is a CLI interface that's just one part of the SDK, which then interacts with the local file system. It will create files for you. They only live in this folder, and most of them you would commit to your repo. And this is the way how to read the documentation. If we're not fully complete yet, but of course, and that's also maybe more towards the technical feasibility analysis. Where is it going to be run? And even in the community version, you have a good contingent of consumption-based for the execution of the cloud robot, the serverless cloud robot. And after developing, and we are going to see soon how to package and publish, it will be run in this target environment. For me, this was really key to explore a little bit what these cloud robots are, the serverless cloud robots, because remember, this is not going to be executed on our beloved unattended VMs, which we sometimes have kept up and running for years, which we might know personally, where we feel familiar if we connect to our unattended robot, maybe for some troubleshooting. Rather, the cloud robots are just spun up at runtime. They live very short, ephemeral systems, ephemeral runners, and they bring a certain packet software provisioning with them out of the box, Python, pip, curl even, but most likely you will be dealing with the Python capabilities, and pip is then that what pulls in the dependencies. It's a standard Linux system. It's like a cloud runner, like in any cloud platform. And in the process, you can set the sizing, and which mostly influences the available space on the hard drive. So from the local development, anticipating where it's going to live, also what kind of costs it might consume if we are going to run them, it's important to get a standard idea here about the serverless robots. Big information, of course, it's a cloud robot. So most likely, if you do not have any really specialized automation suite setups, I only did read about these in the documentation, I have no experience. Most likely you're in the automation cloud, which means connectivity-wise, if you are tasked to give a technical feasibility analysis when it comes to availability of resources, you can easily connect to other cloud resources like LLM providers in the cloud. But unless you do explicit steps going through a gateway, you will have a hard time then talking to your on-prem resources. If you are going to access anything like an API on-prem, you need to get this solved on the network level, on the infrastructure level first. So in our bucket of potential candidates for use cases for this type of development, it's the cloud connectivity, which I would really point out that is the number one filter for the respective use cases. You also see here there is no graphical interface, so you do not have a browser installed, or you do not have the capability open a sub GUI or anything like this. So this is headless machines, and I can only assume these headless, quickly spun up resources will also only become more prominent in the platform in the future. Continuing to look a little bit further, how these coded agents then are going to look like on the orchestrator, that's where we're heading now, is the following. Coded agents. For me, I would like to, with a little twink of the eye, point you towards that it's a coded process, maybe. Let's see why I come to this conclusion. And again, in this hypothetical mini project that we had, you are guided by the documentation, which you should now be somewhat familiar what it instructs you to do, where you have now, based on the previous slide, some idea what type of activity is going on. Again, UV run UiPath auth, always prefix with UV run. It will create, for example, the folder UiPath with an auth JSON, and UV run UiPath init. We've seen screenshots of the documentation before. Is the latest version also going to create some files? Why is this important? Remember, I said the Py project.toml is a little bit like the project JSON, but not fully. Specifically in the UiPath Studio project JSON, we have the entry points defined, and an entry point is nothing that Python natively knows about, so it's implemented here, and we all know how important the entry point is. Typically, we have the main.xaml, but maybe you also have project organizations like me. I typically have not main.xaml, but dispatcher.xaml, performer.xaml if I want to reuse some code base. So the entry points is what we can select then in the drop down in the orchestrator and make it executable. The docs also show you how to point to different files. We've already seen executed top to bottom. You can specify and execute some of these files then, and that's where how you would also then implement some different entry points. Just to get you an idea of what type of files this contains or creates, a little bit similar like the project JSON, nothing too fancy. And you will also find the input-output arguments that were defined in this data class. The documents also go in a little bit more into detail. More important for me now, and that's where I start when it started to click for me, is when I then really did remember we authenticated. The CLI command will guide you through the authentication process, and you are then ready, if you also follow the getting started guide, to pack and publish. Also two processes we know very well from the UiPath Studio. And packing again, and that's when it clicked to me, what the UiPath SDK is doing under the hood, so to say, is again creating the same NuGet package as we are used from the .NET environment in UiPath Studio. So here's some screenshots from the zip file. A NuGet package is nothing but a zip file. I even have the standard zip from software conventionally mapped to always open them. And that looks very similar to what we know from the packaging process in the UiPath Studio. And at this point, it also clicked something more with me, because now I felt very comfortable. Why? Because in the orchestrator that we know really well now, after typical many years of UiPath development, most everything works as before. A small subtle difference is that this environment file convention that I mentioned about is also repeated here. But again, then we have entry points, input, output arguments, and it's a package in the package folder. And that's the one that really made me feel at home, because we trust the orchestrator for its role-based access control, for its credential handling. We have the orchestrator typically IT security-wise long signed off in the corporate environment. And if it goes as seamlessly into the orchestrator, that really convinced me. Wrapping this up, and maybe this is also something to refer back to in the recording or in the slide deck that we are publishing. You see here some analogies, some comparison between that, because with this I hope that not only you can read the documentation more easily, even if it's a new programming language that you might not be familiar with, but also have the comparison how it works in comparison to the .NET world. So why is all this so important for me to deal with these coded agents? Why do we need them? There were some very interesting learnings last year that I would like to share with you. Maybe let's have a look at the orchestrator itself. You already saw some screenshots. I have published a couple of Python processes here in this workspace. And for example, this, what I named here very badly, Pythonic UiPath, is nothing but such an cloud robot executable process. We are going to look very, very briefly at the code also, but it works here. Really, I want to show you it works as before. We saw this on the screenshots. It's pulling in the dependencies here a little bit more than in the minimal example. And again, this ephemeral runner, the software distribution, the packaging only happens now when it's executed. And that's why it's important to understand why we prepare this one folder, which we are going to package in a NuGet package and then publish to the orchestrator, that it contains everything that's required to be done again then on the remote platform. So looking at the time, I don't want to spend too much here on this part, but we can maybe come to back to this later. I have also prepared this as a locally run version, and because, whoops, let's see how it works with a screen sharing. The code that I have here is nothing but the good old RPA challenge that I assume if you are any type of UiPath professional know how to do this in the UiPath Studio. You all automated this as part of your advanced certification in the past. Now, why are the coded agents for me so interesting? And I'm even pushing the boundaries, maybe breaking the radio again, because if coded agents are really, really made for to automate a browser, you'll see, you will tell us later. But yeah, maybe I broke the radio. Still, why is it important? And that's what changed in 2025 for me. The way we develop software is now much more shifting focus from the development to the solution design. Working with LLMs as a pair programmer enables you to reach an efficiency that I was really, last year I only had one hobby, IT. I did not go cycling, almost no cycling. I did not pursue my other hobbies because it was so exciting what happened here. And the difference with Python and coded agent with Python for me is because the models are much better trained on Python. And that's a highly important aspect to understand. What we see here is the requirements file, which is enough then for the LLM to create the code. I did not write the RPA challenge implementation myself. I spent 2 or 3 hours talking about the integration with the LLM and then instructed it to generate the code. And to be honest, in Studio, I never managed to make it that fast. I know there are some even faster implementations possible, not in Studio, I sincerely believe. And by adapting to this new world of LLM pair programming development workflow, implementing the code I was really stoked. Last year was crazy. Last year was another demo very quickly. You can also find it in the UiPath forum in the specialist coded agent challenge. Was my contribution. There's a 15-minute video also linking to the code where if you want to, you could follow up. For the moment, just want to show you there's again some environment configuration. The rest is really the same as before. And this is one process where it takes email signatures as unstructured text and finds the identifier for the electronic invoicing system that European companies have to comply with next year. Kind of the idea, we do so many mailbox automations, let a little bug, let a little virus, add a little script, add on to our automation processes to automate them. Let me see if I have maybe listed some pre-filled signature. Yeah, here is one that will work. We can come back to this later. Because again, I expect fully that in the future, the work will shift, as we call it, to the business analyst from the developer. And the developer piece of the cake will be shorter because the technology will be chosen by the decision which technology the model is trained on. And Python is much better represented in the training data of LLM. Boris Cherny wrote most likely the most influential piece of software in last year, Claude Code, the terminal user agent. And he said we wanted a tech stack which we didn't need to teach. And I have strong opinions that the .xaml files of the Windows Workflow Foundation will hardly ever be properly represented, at least in comparison to the Python. So the answer why coded agents, which I call coded process, and pushing the limits of what they do and what they're morally meant to, is because I think they best complement the workflow that I saw last year emerging. I opened the terminal, I spent 2 hours in the terminal, and then I review, then I only open the editor for some review of the code. And then within a couple of 10, 20 minutes, the LLM implements the code that is done. That's the efficiency gain that I saw, because these 2 hours are very well spent. And here in the quick implementation, that's where the overall speed comes from. Rounding this off is maybe with some remarks how to set it up. Here's a screenshot where I have not only a documentation folder, but where I also pull in other Markdown files that I can ask the LLM to read. And I also found great use of the so-called notebooks. If you're going to follow any type of Python tutorials, you will inevitably see Python has these notebooks, little cells. They are visibly on the next page, where you can interactively run code. What's specific about the polyglot notebooks, you can mix C# and Python code. And again, remember, you do a lot of requirements engineering at first, lots of solution design, and indeed with this dual approach here with Python and C#, I could generate test data, maybe for use in UiPath Studio, but I could also write short test scripts in Python to see if my validation logic was good. So the polyglot notebooks most likely will become my 2026 companion to the UiPath Studio for traditional UiPath development. Kind of rounding it off, the test-driven development in the last year was the typical approach, how I approach any type of more complex automation projects. And there are also talks, I think, in the Stuttgart user group. Maybe the recording is auto-translated to English, how to approach this. And but one big value I already found in the past when I had already UiPath Studio Code is generate pseudocode, which I found great for documentation purposes. But now, indeed, it seems to be a sweet spot that I can write my specs file and my requirements and then generate not just pseudocode, but BPM and DNM. I'm documenting this kind of here in the build log in the forum. The test data generation I've already pretty much covered. And I can assume in the next weeks I will also put the second part, the implementing the logic from the ground up, pair programming with an LLM and not myself in the studio. Because, yeah, remember, I'm quite sure the focus shifts. Don't be too narrowly focused here on the role description. What is needed here is knowledge of software design patterns. You need to know very specific terminology. So it will be most likely the same developer person, which will just work, not just business analyst, but solution design approach. And the handwriting of code, I'm quite sure that will fizzle out in the next years. Again, the key decision that I jumped very much deep into the Python development again was that I did read focus on the technologies that are well represented in the training data. Yeah, and with that, I think looking at the time, did the one job here. Oh, I did not start it. Anyhow, this is documented also here in the specialist coding challenge in the video. It's a LangChain or LangGraph. Can't remember. Last month were crazy in software output. It takes a signature, splits the signature, then finds it via an API, uses an LLM to better extract from the signature where simple parsing could not work. And yeah, it's a big thing in Europe. We need this ID, this PEPOL ID for to be compliant for electronic invoicing. Yeah, and with that being said, I hope you get an idea how to, let me see, how to best jump back to the one. If you as a developer, and I'm happy that so many developers were here in the call, want to approach this, still you have to learn Python. I cannot teach you Python in 20, 30 minutes, but there are many great tutorials out there. Thomas Jansen, whom we all most likely know from his YouTube tutorials about UiPath, has also pivoted into LangChain tutorials, not only on YouTube, but also on Udemy. And if you then have an idea about the setup, and yeah, maybe I need to do this also this way. If you know how to read the documentation, translating what you most likely well know from the traditional RPA development, I strongly suggest you to use one of these terminal user agents and making your way into this type of development. It's very rewarding. I'm not the only one who spent hours and hours in the last year, and because, yeah, addictive would be too much to say, but I would kind of think that it's a transition. We all need to learn new things, and 2026 is going to be a very exciting way. Again, yeah, the using Selenium and a headless browser to automate RPA challenge might have been pushing the boundaries, like breaking the radio as a child. And I'm looking forward then to hear from UiPath Product Management how they see the coded agent best used, and maybe also what is next on the horizon in the product portfolio.
Cool. Thanks. Since I've seen some questions on the chat, I will also address those. So what I will do next will be to move super fast over a complex example, but fear not, I will point you to some resources that will dive deeper into those. Still fast-paced, but would cover them all. So consider this as an appetizer, something that would spark the interest and just to give you a glimpse of what is to come and what we can do and what we can achieve with a platform like UiPath in the space of coded agents. So Christian, can I maybe take the share screen? Cool. And there was a question on the use cases, and I think the best approach would be to actually share one. Typically, what we found out, and trust me, I had this discussion with multiple customers, and I've seen the full journey from starting on a discussion where we were both clueless on what will be the approach up to deploying them to production. And typically sounds something like this. Handling logistics requests, it's up a lot of time and resources on our time and sometimes even patience. And it's not something that we can RPA. And there was a question on when should we use RPA and when should we use agents. And we are super specific. We should not use agents for the sake of agents. That typically ends up being a waste of time and waste of reliability. We do see both of them working together to provide reliability and predictability where it's best fit, and to add this extra layer of possibilities with agents. So with logistic requests, that would be as an income stream of unstructured requests and codes requests would require dynamic decision making with steps that are not predictable. This would be a typical use case. And more than that, what we hear a lot is that this would be sensitive, right? This would involve money. This would have a direct impact on the profitability. The way we respond to logistic requests and codes, obviously the price that we give, then that's a very important one. So the question is there a way out of this logistic processing maze? And the answer, I would argue, it's yes. Just to go super fast through this example, this is just a business discussion that will start with, I know, this is the email, and I will actually use for this demo, I will use this email as the input. Hi, we need to arrange a transportation from this point to that point, the shipment details, and a signature, and that will be, this would be the entry point. And then this would be a discussion business people would have, or an analysis of the current business process. We would validate the customer, would understand the email, would calculate the discount based on some formulas, calculate the cost, which is our cost. Then, based on a threshold, we would have a human review. Maybe the agent is not confident enough to proceed end to end with the request. So we can have, and we should have this step. Finally, send the response, and very importantly, to start an internal process for actually delivering those services. Now, I think it's enough with PowerPoints and graphical stuff. I will jump right into the IDE. I'm not sure, Christian, if IDEs are dead, but we'll see. I will zoom in a bit. Sorry if the print is too small. I will do my best to be readable to some extent. And yeah, I have this 1,000 lines of code, and this 1,000 lines of code would simulate this entire process. And along the way, it uses a lot of UiPath artifacts that are key to actually delivering these in a reliable fashion. If you want to see what are the classes, you can see here, these are all the methods and all the steps. And if you want to visualize this, we can do that with the mermaid diagram. This is generated automatically based on the code. I did not generate. So with UiPath init, it generates this mermaid diagram. Now, fear not, this might seem overly complicated. It's not about that. We can focus on a single path. Let's say if I want to draw, I will focus on a path where that company is a validated one. I understand the request. I understand this is about a new order. I will handle the order, collect the output for the new order, would skip the human review because I have confidence, and then finalize the output. Right? But I have other, in a workflow, I have multiple possible paths that can be designed, and we can take care of those. So going back to the IDE, the typical workflow would be to just have an initial run. So for that, I prepared an input. Let me just show you here input order, which would be maybe the most complex one. You see here that we need to arrange the transportation for electronic components is exactly what I've shown you here. We need to arrange a transportation for electronic components. This is the input. So the only thing that I've given here is the email and an input. And the email is not even the valid one, and I will tell you why, because it validates based on the domain. So let me do authentication. Just to make sure that everything will work smooth. And now I will run this agent locally. So before going to production, as a typical step would be to run it locally and validate at least the happy path is good enough. And as you can see now, it goes step by step. And if we go back to the Marmaid diagram, we can see these steps, which, as you can see here, is understand email. You see that I'm at this state and I can understand everything that happens and that step. And then would be calculate discount node, right? And in this case, the discount applied is 0 because it did not have an order in the last 5 days. But if it would have had, then a discount would be applied. Now, the way it calculates this is using a lot of UiPath artifacts. Just to name one, for example, in UiPath, I can go to data fabric, for instance, right? And in the data fabric, I would have all information for the companies. And I can even see, for instance, I can inspect some data, and you see Nordic Wholesale Group. This is one of the companies. And one of the steps that this agent has is to validate the company. And you can see here, company name, it is identified by domain. And based on that, I know that this is a valid company. We do have a contract with this company and we can proceed, right? Another step would be to handle the order and to calculate the actual price, right? And then for that, we will have to understand what is our price for the model. Then we'll calculate the distance, and we have this distance. Now, the way we calculated this distance is by calling an MCP tool, which we define within UiPath, and I can briefly show you that. Here in the shared folder, I have an MCP server, and this MCP server is actually Google Maps MCP. This is the official server, MCP server provided by Google. The only thing that we had to do to get this MCP server is to provide this command. It's basically this. That's it, one command, npx, and this one, which would get the Python script, the official one from Google, download to the UiPath, and we will host it for you, and obviously a key. And now going back, we have one tool that was called, let's see, distance metrics, which would get the distance. And you can see here it is use a slash to get the distance, which in this case is is this distance. And for more than that, it uses context grounding, and I have indexes where I have the contact, the company policy, so on and so forth, up until I have this final confirmation, like, thank you, Maria Jensen, for this order. Everything is handled. We confirm the order, and we even place a new order in the queue. So we trigger another RPA process at the end of it. Now, this is a happy flow run. What we typically do in these cases is, from a dev perspective, and since we had in the audience multiple developers, this one would not be enough. For one run, we want to see the full history, the detailed history, the tool call for this run. And for that, we have the UiPath dev interface. And once we are in this interface, then we can take the same example, and I can take this one, copy the input here, and run it. And you can see I have this input and the output, obviously, but More than that, now I have detailed traces locally. I don't have to leave the IDE to deploy it and to see the traces. I can validate locally. And what I expect here is to see each step, and I can go back to the mermaid diagram. For instance, understand the request would be this one, and I can see whatever the LLM consider to generate here. For instance, calculate discount, what is the model, and so on and so forth. And maybe, look, this map distance matrix, if you remember, this is the one that you've seen previously. So I can see that I have this tool. Sorry, a bit up. Where was it? Okay, like tool call. It was distance matrix. Okay, maps. Yeah, maps distance matrix. And I can see all the parameters for this tool call, which is actually this tool that I provided as a tool for this agent. This is just a deep dive into a very pinpoint example, but you understand how we can leverage the UiPath artifact, like in this case, MCP server, and a tool from that command MCP server to give access to this agent to a way to calculate the distance. And with that information, which is dynamic, to calculate the offer, the final code to the end user. Now, this might not be enough. In a real example, so what I'm showing here is trying to be honest and to recreate what is the actual experience, not for having fun, but for providing value. And for providing value, there is one, if you're honest, one thing that we, as engineers, will go through, which is the debug experience. And for that, we can even do that. Let me show you an example. I can go, let me, I should authenticate again. Oh no, I have to restart it. So you can see that this experience with debug, I can have it here, but also I can have it in Studio. So let's do that very quickly, just to understand how we can have this in Studio. So I go to Studio, I say, I want to create a new agent. This time would be coded one. I'll say I want to start fresh. I have here the UiPath project ID. I can copy the UiPath project ID. I will go to the environment file, copy this one here, comment the previous one, save. And with that, I can have UiPath push. Let me see. And now everything that I have locally will be pushed to Studio, everything, including the eval. So now if I go back to the Studio project, you see that this diagram, which is actually this diagram, and the two projects are now in sync. In this case, I define some evaluation sets, and this is one concept. Another one that would be absolutely critical in order to provide that delta, that difference between something that works or works in good scenarios and something that you can trust in production. For instance, here, just to emphasize on how this would look like, I can show you. Let me see which one would be best to be shown here. Evaluators. And I have here multiple ones. Let me go back. Sorry. Cool. So as you've seen before, I had this case where I have a new order. This would be the best or the typical case here. Now, in order I can have a final result, which is perfect, which is the one that I've shown you before. Let me zoom in here, and you can see the details. I can have this like, dear Maria, thank you for your order. We confirm, and everything is good. The important part is that I know that the email is not only the email is okay, but actually the order is okay, which means that I took the necessary steps for it to happen. One of the necessary steps is to call these tools, which is distance tool and shipment retrieval tool, so that I know that it went through the step of calculating the distance prior to making the code. And I can add this evaluator to evaluate if that tool call was actually made on that trajectory from start to the end. And obviously, I can also handle the trajectory and say, I'm not only interested that you've called a tool, but I'm interested in the steps you took in order to complete that order. And I added these as an LLM trajectory judge. Now, if I go back to the evaluation set, I can see some runs. For instance, here I can see that these runs are fine. I can work with them. I can reference them, and I have 100% score. Hence, I can gain confidence before moving to production. And for instance, for new order, I have evaluator tool call order, and I have this 100%, meaning that this tool call was actually made. And here's the entire story with evaluators that we have deterministic and not deterministic evaluators, and even custom ones. And we go so granular understanding what is the true need that we can even mock some of the steps, right? So if you think of this flow, or we can even look here, maybe I want to evaluate a certain step, like handle complaint. Let's say this is the one that I want to evaluate. Typically, what you would do, you would run something with the previous steps. You would accumulate what happens in the previous steps, and then evaluate the answer here, which might be valuable, but think about it. You typically want to have a zoom in into this point and to say it will hit this node with a certain input that I can control. So I will mock that input, would hit that node, and with that, with a predefined input, I will evaluate in a standalone manner how this handle complaint node actually behaves. Now, we don't have time to go into those kind of details. Just wanted to give you a glimpse into what this what the real use case would look like in implementation. And by the way, this is not a random use case. This is inspired by discussion that we had with customers, and we know that this is a real problem, and we know that this could have not been solved only with RPAs, and we know that this provides real value. Now, if you want, and I truly encourage you, is the latest and one of the best ways we can describe this. I even prepared a QR code where you can go to a video that describes this in full and in detail. And yeah, just please take your time to have this with you. Obviously, you have this session recorded, but to complete the story and to have the full picture, this video would be a great one. I think, given the audience and given that you are technical and that most of you, as I've seen, have already experience with agents, I think this one would be highly appreciated. Thanks. In the interest of time, I think I should stop here. I'm not sure if you have any time for questions.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much for this great overview or even deep dive and showcase. We have, I think, answered most of the questions in the chat already, or if not all. I will briefly share my screen, but it's really towards the end. If you have any questions, feel free to post that in chat. I'll go through one or real quick, or to share this image. I had posted it in the chat also, but also for the sake of the recording, because the question was there, when do we, or could we use an agent? Why? And this is by Gartner, was published, I think, in June last year. And one of the figures here, an agent sweet spot, because traditional automations could be enough, then you would not use an agent, or as you Sibu mentioned, using agents for the sake of agents and so on. So yeah, this is one of the graphics I keep going back to. And now I would basically go towards the end. I did not scroll along with you, and I have basically just the discussion up here. Unless, I mean, you guys, Christian, you see, if you'd seen anything in the chat you'd like to pick up, but most of it was answered. Everything, I must say, was answered. Yeah, if you have any more questions, that's fine. Please post them. I will once again post our LinkedIn profiles where you can connect with us. Also, we'd like to hear from you, I guess, on some use cases you've built or are building, what your experiences have been, or feedback also on this event. Anything, sometimes it comes to you in the aftermath, where you get or are able to formulate the question better. Feel free to reach out. Yeah, I think there's no questions right now coming in, so I will stop the recording. This again, it's always being asked. Yeah, you can, or you will get the recording, and you will also get the slide deck that we shared. So I will stop the recording here. Thanks so much for the attention.